Welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. Listen in as we discuss all things business, growth and marketing with business owners, thought leaders and entrepreneurs. And now, here's your host, founder of Roundhouse, the creative agency, Saul Edmonds.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Greg Taylor from Mount Roland Hazelnuts around the topic of organic produce in Australia. Greg, how are you going today?
Yeah, good, Saul. Good to talk with you and look forward to a good chat today.
Yeah, likewise. Is just on a nice light weather-related note, what's the weather what's the weather like down in Tasmania today?
In sunny Tasmania, yeah. Well, it has been really good, but today it's packed it in a bit, unfortunately. And looking out the window now, we've got a totally grey sky with a few showers coming through, and it's feeling a bit more like winter than it has been. So I guess that's where we're heading for. So we better get used to it.
Yeah, that's right. It's generally pretty cold down there, though, isn't it? Like for most of the year.
It's all relative, I suppose. It depends what you're used to and what you like. Personally, I love winter and enjoy winter a lot more than summertime.
Yeah.
It's generally a time when it is colder, yes, but you can have the fire going and you put on another jumper and you can actually really get into the sort of the indoors mode a bit through winter sometimes. But it's great. I really enjoy the winter, but I find summer times are too hot sometimes and too dry, and there's too many snakes and there's too much worries about bushfires and all the rest of the stuff. Whereas winter, you haven't got all that stuff. So winter's nice. I like it.
Yeah, so more pluses than negatives. Plus, you get to have a nice hot drink near the fire on occasions.
Yeah, it's cosy, I think, and that's what Tasmania perhaps specialises in, that sort of cosy winter.
I know,
feel.
yeah. That's actually good. That's always what I think. I'm not sure why, but I always think about that sort of environment when I think about Tassie. Plus all the greenery and the beautiful landscape, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. It's very green at the moment. We've had a lot of rain through autumn, and the grass is growing frantically everywhere, and it's as green as green as green. So, wow. Yeah, it's the landscape here is lovely. We live in a beautiful part of the world. So, so it's very, very, very nice place to live. Really, no grumbles at all about living in Tasmania.
That's fantastic. So I will just dive in. Just first of all, just with I guess a general outline of Mount Roland Hazelnuts, yourself, history. If you just want to give everyone a bit of an overview of what it's all about and I guess your role there as well.
Sure. Yeah, so a bit of a part of the history of what we're doing here. Basically, our farm is 50 acres, 20 hectares or so, and it's just outside Sheffield in northwest Tasmania. And Sheffield is about half an hour inland from Devonport. So Sheffield is about halfway between Devonport, which is on the north coast, and Cradle Mountain. Cradle Mountain is sort of a further 30 minutes inland from us. So many people would be familiar with that. So we're sort of in between those 2 points, between the coast and the mountains. It's a farming area. Moved here in 2006, and because I've always had an ambition and a desire to do something on a farm. And in 2006, I thought, well, gee, I'm getting a bit older here. But at that stage, I was 46, I think. And so you realise that farming is not an old person's game. You need to get into it while you've still got a healthy body and a reasonably functioning mind. And so we bought the farm in 2006 and then came here and thought, okay, so what's going to happen on this 50 acres of land? Traditionally, it had been used for cattle mostly, a bit of growing potatoes, things like that, but mostly for something which was more involved with growing plants, because that's been my passion and love for a long time. Looked around for the various options, and after a little while researching things, come up with the idea of growing hazelnuts here. There seemed to be a lot of reasons why it would work, but it hadn't really been done successfully in Tasmania up to that point, growing hazelnuts. It was always a bit of a new venture, a bit of a pioneering thing to try and work out how exactly to do it and how it's going to work. So in 2007, we started planted 200 trees of hazelnuts just as a trial, I suppose, to see what was going to happen, because you just don't know really. And then after that first year, everything seemed to be going well. So I thought, oh, well, let's just jump in and bite the bullet and just do it. So we then planted a further 1,000 trees in 2008. And that gave us a total of 1,200 over about 3 hectares. That is regarded as being sort of a commercial size for a hazelnut orchard. It's the size at which you start to get the economies of scale and you start to get the critical mass that you need to actually produce a commercial product. So that's been a gradual thing ever since that period, I suppose. Hazelnuts take a fair while to establish and to grow and to become bearing nuts. So it's really 6 or 7 years after the first planting before you really start to get anything decent in the way of a crop. And then, in theory, after that time, it should just build and continue to build, and until probably you reach your peak, maybe after 15 or 20 years. And then one of the great attractions of growing hazelnuts is that they're not an annual crop or anything like that. They grow perennially, so you go for a long time. So the trees might actually live for 50 or even 100 years quite viably and be productive for that period. So once you got through all the setting up phase and onto it, then the theory is that then you'll have an annual crop coming in, and as the trees get bigger, there's in fact less work to do on them because they're more established and they're more settled. So that was the theory, that you start to get a viable crop coming in every year, and it's ongoing into the future. The practice is not quite actually like that like that theory, because we've learned a lot along the way. It's not all as rosy and as straightforward as that, but that's the basic premise. And the other thing about hazelnuts that were attractive to us was the fact that they are they're just a really nice tree. They're an interesting tree to be around. They're different. They're like, for example, they flower right in the middle of winter. In July, and that's something which most plants don't.
That's pretty unusual, isn't it?
It is, and it's just a weird thing. And they also produce their catkins, which is the other part of their breeding cycle. They're already on the tree now in late May. So you have your harvest in March each year, and then all the leaves drop off because they're deciduous. But through winter, you've got these catkins going on, and you've got this flowering going on, and then it's actually, the trees are quite interesting to watch and to be around, and they're just a nice environment to be part of, and that's a very big attraction to working with hazelnuts as well. So that's the basic attraction for us, I suppose. And together with my partner Elizabeth, we've been growing them commercially now for since about 2015, I suppose, is when it first really started to kick into being a commercial thing. And since then, we've been sort of developing and building and learning lots, and to get us where we are now in 2020.
Yeah, I would imagine that these, not having any, having some experience in other parts of our family with people growing pineapples and macadamia nuts, I've sort of had a little bit of exposure to some of that time frame that it takes to things, and it's always been something that I've kind of marveled at, in the sense that you there's quite a considerably long period where you just really have to nurture, watch, and you have to make sure that things are growing in a certain way, and that I guess maybe the right word is that element of faith that it's all going to work out. How you plan it to work out.
Blind hope, I think. So
hope or faith. Yeah, in that's going to sort of work out. But then once that hits that sort of point and you've gone through this sort of process, it's always something that I've been really amazed at, and knowing that it's obviously a lot of hard work too. To have to do that, and from the initial planting of like so many trees. Is the in the case of hazelnuts, is there a optimum sort of space that you have to have between the trees?
Yeah, no, very much so, and that's all. There's a lot of knowledge that you need to know when you're designing your orchards, I suppose, as to how you lay them out, and how far between the rows, how far between the trees, how much room do you leave at the end of each row for a tractor to turn around? It's a really
of course, yeah.
How do you irrigate? How do you fertilise? What sort of soil do you need? What sort of aspect do you need? Is it sunny or sheltered? Should they be sheltered from the wind, or is the wind a problem? All of these things are really, really, really vital. But when you're starting out and you're going to say, I've got this paddock and I want to plant some trees into it, these are things you don't know. All this stuff about how far between the rows and how far between the trees, how many trees to the hectare. If you get it wrong at the start, then you sort of done it. You've gone backwards
Exactly.
and go forwards. So it's really critical that at the start you talk with people who've already been in the industry, or you somehow do your research to find out the answers to these questions and you plan appropriately. It's a really a challenging thing, especially in a relatively new industry like hazelnuts in Australia. I mean, they've been growing hazelnuts in Turkey and in Italy and in France and even in Oregon in the US for a long time, and they've worked out how to do things in those environments. But the Australian environment is different and peculiar, and even Tasmania is different to the mainland. So you've got to work out how it works in your local environment. So you have to do all your research at the start and come up with the answers as best you can, but there'll still be, as we found, gaps that you just can't answer because no one's done it here locally. And that's where the risk comes in, because the things may work for you and it's great if they do, but there's also things that can go wrong. And that's a very real part of any new enterprise. It's a risk you take. You have to be prepared to take that risk. And it's a dual-fold risk, because the other part of what you're mentioning is about the lead time between the planting and the crop return. We're talking at least 7 or 8 years, and maybe more, probably more. And I liken it to having a part-time job, working maybe 3 days a week for maybe 10 years without any return whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's taking your time, it's taking a lot of money, you're putting a lot of investment into it, but there's no guarantee at all that you're going to get any return from it whatsoever. And that is a risk, and you have to be a wee bit crazy perhaps to do that sort of thing. It's much safer to go and do something which is conventional, regular and normal, and like get a job somewhere and do it that way. But to take on a risk, you have to be a sort of a person who enjoys having trying new things and is prepared to sort of, when the problems come up, as invariably they do, you have to have a strategy in place to be able to work through the problems that come along. Because there's problems all the time. There's new things occur which you haven't thought of, and problem solving is one of the key skills you need to have.
Yeah. Would you say too, just on, I guess, that topic of things that arise too, are there any specific pests or certain insects that are specific to Tasmania and your area that you've had like ongoing little, let's say wars or sort of things that you've had to problem solve with that keep on cropping up all the time, especially given that things are being done organically and you're not,
yes.
and it's going to be a different sort of approach. Could you tell us like a little bit about, like in that context to how you handle some of those issues?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and it's very true. What the word you mentioned, organics, that's what we're trying to do, and we're trying to grow hazelnuts commercially in an organic way. And as far as we know, we're the only commercial scale organic hazelnut orchard in Australia. So not only have we the challenge of producing a crop which is relatively new to Australia in hazelnuts, but we're trying to do that in a what seems to be a unique way in Australia, growing them organically. So you've got 2 layers of complexity and challenge associated with that, and that's significant. I guess one of the obvious things from up until now, and perhaps later on I can talk about one of the current challenges we've got, but up until now, one of our biggest challenges is that here in northwest Tasmania, we've got really fertile soils, we've got really good rainfall, and it's a great place for grazing cattle and sheep, which is what this property has historically been doing. But the grass growth presents a problem for hazelnuts. It's great for cattle, but for hazelnuts don't really like grass competition that much. So then think the question is, well, how do you create an environment where the hazelnuts aren't competing with the grass in this dense pasture, because the grass can just choke them. So in conventional hazelnut orchards, and in most of the orchards you see around, whether it's macadamias or bananas or whatever, I think most people control the grass around the plant by applying a herbicide, usually glyphosate, Roundup, and they spray out the grass. And so what you see is a row of trees, maybe with grass between the rows, but down the row you see bare soil, and that's been sprayed out with Roundup to achieve that, and that means the tree doesn't have to compete with grass, so it'll do a lot better from that point of view. But being an organic grower, we don't have the option of using glyphosate in that way, and we don't want to use it either for other reasons, but it's not an option available to us. So we have to work out ways of managing the grass so that it doesn't impact negatively on our hazelnuts. That's been a real challenge and an ongoing one, and we've been working through that ever since we planted the trees, really. And there's many ways we've tried to tackle that. But it's a real challenge, and for conventional growers of hazelnuts, it's not such a challenge, but for us, it's a huge issue.
Yeah, and have you got then, with that in mind too, because you're not using, say, herbicides and insecticides, are there things, say, specific to other plants that you might use in within the orchard without to sort of either discourage certain insects from coming in or encouraging other ones as well?
Yeah. That's a huge part. It's a really powerful question, that one. Well, our approach in an organic sense is to try and work in with nature, whereas in a conventional farming model, generally you try and tame nature. You try and make things do what you want them to do. So if you had say an aphid problem, you would say, we don't want an aphid problem, so we'll come through with a pesticide and we'll spray it through the orchard and we'll try and kill the aphids that way so that they're not damaging our crop. That's the conventional model of doing it. In our organic model, we say we try and create the environment in which balance can be produced. So we try really hard to have a range of biodiversity on the farm so that nothing gets majorly out of whack. There's no sort of major population explosions of aphids or bugs or anything like that. We try and have a rich, biodiverse environment so that if we do start to get the aphids coming in October when they come, we've got this other insects which are already part of your system, and they of themselves say, aphids, let's go and eat the aphids because we love eating aphids. So for us, that's ladybirds. They are part of biodiversity setup, and they love eating aphids. So rather than going and spraying for the aphids, we try and do things which will encourage the population of ladybirds so that the ladybirds can control the aphids. And that's worked really well for us over the time we've been here, such that we've never had to spray anything for any pesticide type of things, because we've got a rich and diverse environment which sort of self-regulates. It's sort of, if there's a surplus of one thing, something else will come along and manage that surplus. And it's actually worked really well. And that's one of the key principles, I think, of organic growing, is that you have a biodiverse environment which hopefully will self-manage in the long term.
Yeah, I think that's like I've got that question, I guess, sort of came also out of a current interest that we have in our sort of homeschooling about observation of nature in general, but specifically with insects. There was a fellow that we're just looking into right now, Jean-Henri Fabre, who was a French fellow who had a series of books about insects in particular, but their observation and the sort of the power is quite obvious in his writings about the power of just observing things and seeing what they do. Apart from the fact that you would, if you've got existing knowledge, but then, like you were saying, if you've got, ladybirds, or if you had a particular species of ant, like, I don't know, like the jumping jack ant that's down there, and it was a problem for some reason, that you would, through, I guess, observation and learning from other people, you can over time form like a really powerful library of information about how things engage with each other.
Yeah.
And is both then obviously for you too, like even on the subject of, once you know those things and you know how they work, they can be, I would theorize they'd be even more powerful than just simply spraying things, because you've got other things that are actually doing the work for you.
Yeah. No, that's a really good observation. I think it's very true. Is that I mentioned a little while ago that grass was our historical problem, but we've got a new problem emerging for us now, which is funnily, it's a sort of ironic problem in a way. Is I've had problems with birds who've been sort of trying to eat some of our hazelnuts when they're almost ripe on the trees. Now, this is a problem which anyone with fruit trees would be familiar with. Is you have your lovely tree of apricots there ready, and they're all ripening beautifully, and you're there watching them, think they're not quite ripe yet. They'll be ripe in another 3 or 4 days, and I'll go out there in 3 or 4 days and I'll pick them. And you go out there in 3 or 4 days and you go to pick them and they're all gone. And because the birds are watching them as well, and they got up earlier than you that day, and they went in and ate them all while you were still sleeping in bed. And now you've got no apricots and an empty tree with a few feathers scattered around it. So that's another problem which comes around, and so the question is, well, how do you manage that problem? How do you do that? And that's where observation of birds and observation of the patterns of things and the way things behave is critical. We've had this year a bit of a problem with white cockatoos, and people say, oh, how do you control those? Well, my answer to that question is, first off, you observe them, get to know them, understand what they're doing, how they're doing it, why they're doing it, get to know their patterns and their habits. For instance, here we observed that the cockatoos fly past our property heading south about 8 in the morning, and they fly back home heading northwards about 6 o'clock at night. This was through our harvest time, and so we surmised that they must have had a home base, if you like, a roost or a nesting tree somewhere north of us. And every day they'd come to work like commuters, and they would fly past our property and they'd go to all the farms down here and they'd do their day's work, and at the end of the day they'd fly back home again. Yeah. So you had these 2 peak times when, if you want to interrupt what cockatoos can do in your orchard, if you were there first thing in the morning when they're flying past, they wouldn't stop because they knew you were there. So they'd go onto someone else's property, lucky them. But at the end of the day, the same, they were going home from work, but going home to their roost tree again. But if you were there at that time between 5 and 6 of an evening, again, the cockatoos would see you and they wouldn't come in. But if you weren't there, they would drop in and they'd check it out and they'd look at it and they'd start to make an impact. So for us, it was a control mechanism worked out by observation of the birds' habits and trying to manage that, and so we could achieve the maximum impact on the birds' presence here, but just by not being there all day, but just being there at those 2 specific times in the day to try and protect the trees from the birds. And that actually did really well for us this year, that model.
Yeah, I think there's certainly something that I don't know about you, but when I would generally think about organics, even though I've got a different perspective, I would imagine most people, when they think about what that even means, is they certainly wouldn't be thinking about what you've just been talking about. The bigger picture of then how whatever crop is being grown fits in with the surroundings. They would probably just be thinking. I mean, I could be wrong here, but I would assume most people are really just thinking, well, there's not use of herbicides or insecticides, but they don't realise that there's a far bigger, far more interesting sort of picture, which I find, like in our own little kind of like humble way trying to grow things, realising that certain little friends in the yard, like to eat certain things. Some don't. Some hang around in a certain way, and some, how they respond to things. Like, I mean, can you control things with encouraging other sorts of spiders to be in the area.
Yeah.
And, which is, from my perspective, is a incredibly interesting and really powerful type of knowledge to have too.
Yeah.
On its own kind of merits, but obviously the bigger picture when you're doing organic farming is kind of crucial to the survival of it, really, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it's absolutely. It's me. It's probably the most important thing about the difference between growing organically and growing in the conventional way. It's very real. It's a completely different mindset. The two things, even though two enterprises could be trying to grow hazelnuts commercially, one grows it conventionally, one grows it organically, but there's so many huge differences between the way the two operators will look at their activities, and it's a very, very different mindset, such almost to the extent that it's like you're doing two completely different things. It's two completely different processes. In the first one, conventional farming, like I said, you try and manipulate everything so that it's, you put on the right amount of this element in your fertilising, and you give that amount of water, and you do this to protect you from insects, and you do that to protect you from birds, and so on. Whereas an organic grower really tries to see the picture, see nature as it is in its totality, I suppose, and then tries as best as they can to fit in with that and to work in with that. Not trying to control nature, but to try and work with nature. And to work with nature, you have to be very aware of nature and understand it. So, it's a very different headspace, if you like, than the conventional farming model. It's quite different. And I find I've got much more in common, for example, with other organic growers, whether they're growing pumpkins or whether they're growing lavender or whether they're growing pears. I've got much more in common with other organic growers than I have with other hazelnut growers who are growing conventionally. The organic mindset is very different, and that's where we spend a lot of time.
I guess is the hazelnut industry at large, say in Australia, let alone the organic hazelnut industry, is that quite a niche sort of industry, would you say?
Yeah, I would say that it's at that stage still where it's very much a niche industry, although it's changing fairly rapidly. Up until probably 20 years ago, there was very little going on with hazelnuts. There have been a few sort of isolated activities here and there, mostly probably in Victoria and Beechworth, and in New South Wales around Orange, Mudgee, that sort of area. And even up north as far as Tenterfield, I think there'd been a bit going on around there. But it had all been fairly exploratory, and it was not of any real scale. And almost all of our hazelnuts were imported from international sources, mostly from Turkey. But in the last 20 years, the industry has started to people saw there was a potential for it, and it started to gain a bit of a foothold, and it started to grow from being just a cottage industry to being a commercial industry. And that process is still underway. And there's now a growing production of hazelnuts in Australia, but it's still quite small relative to what we import. I think we import 20,000 tonnes a year from Turkey mostly, but our local...
It's a lot of hazelnuts.
Yeah, it is, and a local production might be 2,000 tonnes,
Oh, really? So much? Wow, that's a lot, isn't it?
There's a huge
difference.
Further increase here in to be able to supply our Australian market with hazelnuts. There's a lot of potential there. People have seen that, said, let's try and do it, and that's where we're up to at the moment. The big change that's happened in the last couple of years, probably 5 years, is that the people that make those lovely chocolates which specialise in hazelnuts that we see all around us in supermarkets, the Ferrero Rocher, most of us are familiar with those. They are a European company, but they have expanded into Australia in recent years because they wanted to be able to guarantee a year-round supply of hazelnuts. So obviously it's off-season in the North Hemisphere to here. So they've set up a very large establishment in New South Wales, Coonabarabran, I think it is. Is that right? And they've actually planted 1 million trees in the last 5 years.
1 million? Oh my gosh!
Huge development, huge. and so that's only fairly recent. So those trees are still growing,
Wow.
coming into production, and over the next 10 years, that'll be a major change. And they are definitely the biggest players in growing hazelnuts in Australia. How well they'll go is another matter altogether, but they've obviously got lots of resources, lots of knowledge, lots of international experience, and lots of cash. And that means that I'm sure we're all sitting back and watching and seeing how they're going to go into the future. But that may be the thing which turns the Australian industry from a cottage industry into a full-on commercial industry.
Yeah, sometimes it just does take somebody who's already well known to raise the level of exposure in a certain area, really, doesn't it? Like like it happens. Can't think of any other specific examples off the top of my head, but in all sorts of industries, whether it's selling products or offering certain services, things that are one-time niche, all of a sudden become, I guess, more in the popular mindset.
Yeah.
Even though, I mean, personally, I kind of love anything relating to hazelnuts.
Yeah.
I love any of the. In fact, I'd probably go so far as to say I like, them more than having chocolate without hazelnuts.
Okay, big statement, Saul.
Yeah, I know. I'm putting it out there, but I have actually. I know when I say that, people are like, "Oh, really? That sounds kind of very specific." But but.
Well,
it's true, and it's out there. Like it's actually been out there for a long time. People don't really, I guess, sort of think about it. But as far as like other exposure that you want to have for Mount Roland as well, and things that you've had in the past, like different things that you do to actually tell people about what you do and the sort of products from your hazelnuts that you offer to people. What sort of things have you got on offer that people can, buy, or if they're down there in that local area that they can experience?
Yep. Yeah, no, that's right. It's one thing to grow things. It's another thing to be able to sell the things that you're growing. And that, I think that's one of the challenges of being a farmer for whatever, but you need to be across a wide range of skills. You need to be able to grow things successfully, but you also need to be able to market them in some way and sell them. And then it all comes into packaging and labelling and graphic design, as you'd know. All that game is part of what we do as well. And for us, our whole business model is built around web sales. So we have a web page and a shop on that web page, and that is how we get our product awareness, if you like, out to the Australian market specifically, is what we target. So, and that's worked well for us. It's been a good thing. We find that especially being organic, means that, and the only ones in Australia, is there are a lot of people out there. I mean, it's not something everyone does every day, and most people probably never even think about it, but there are some people out there in the Australian market who would really like to, say, produce organic chocolate-coated hazelnuts, for example. And we do get inquiries from these sort of people who are existing confectioners, but who have not been able to source organic hazelnuts in Australia. They really want them, but they haven't been able to source them. So there is a big market for that because, as you pointed out, hazelnuts and chocolate are a well-known phenomenon. The two things go really well together, and some people are very keen on those. And Ferrero Rocher have made a whole industry out of just that combination. So for us to get our knowledge of our products out there, that's where we have our webpage, and we sell on that. Up to this point, we've been selling probably two or three things. One is we sell the hazelnuts cracked, so that we just sell the kernel, and we package those up into kilo bags, 2 kilo bags, 5 kilo bags, and we post those. We get an order in from our webpage, we crack the nuts to that order so they're fresh, and we post them off the next day, and we post them by express post. And so if you put an order in Brisbane today, in 2 days' time, we could have the nuts to you, freshly cracked, in a package, delivered to your door. model, and that works really well for customers, whether they be individual customers as people buying for their own family to eat, or whether it's for a restaurant or a cafe to use on their menu in some sort of dish that they're making, or for bakers who want to have reduced batches of cookies or whatever it is every month. They can order from us and do it that way. So that model has worked really well for us, just selling raw kernel to the Australian market. It's been very good. But in recent times, we've been trying to experiment more with the value-adding side of it and to add a range of products to our portfolio. So one we've established last year was production of hazelnut oil, which is, again, that's a very niche product. And people say, well, what's hazelnut oil and what do you use that for? Well, most people simply wouldn't know that because it's a very esoteric sort of knowledge, I suppose. But hazelnut oil is a product which has very exciting and valuable products, very qualities, I should say. Hazelnut oil is very useful, just like olive oil is used in the kitchen for a whole range of things. You can use hazelnut oil for nearly all of those uses in the kitchen. So it's a very useful and versatile oil product that has a range of applications and gives a distinctly nutty flavour to, say, for salad dressings, things like that. Really quite delicious and sought after, but in a minority niche sort of way. So that's one use for hazelnut oil has been in that. But the other big use for hazelnut oil, and it's the one where we see the most potential, is as a skin care product. Hazelnut oil has amazing skincare properties. It's a very good moisturiser and a skin rejuvenator. So oftentimes it's used as a massage oil or used in massages. It can be used in that as an oil which improves the tone of the skin. But also it can be used by beauticians and by naturopaths in making healing balms for the skin. And we see that as being a really exciting direction for us to go into the future, into making more hazelnut oil, which can be used in that way.
That sounds great. I've sort of noticed just in shops in general, there seems to have been an increase in other sorts of oils being offered, whereas there wasn't previously. There's sort of just a general observation, even in places like Woolworths, of having avocado oil and other types of oil. So I kind of take from that certain things that used to be more niche.
Yes.
I think generally, like, have a bit of a personal theory about things that are niche in general, is that they'll always go through some sort of cycle of once being niche and eventually will become more popular at some point. And they might not be as popular as other things, but eventually they will, because people will find out. Like you said, they'll find out often then through means that are more popular or have more exposure, just how good they are. And then all of a sudden there'll be, an explosion. It was interesting. We did we worked with some people to develop a website a number of years ago who have a really interesting podcast called The Pass, which is all about the restaurant industry in Australia. And some of Australia's most well-known chefs talking about food and and all those things. And one of the things that cropped up all the time in that from chefs was their importance that they placed on fresh produce, and for a lot of them then a produce that was organic. And one of the topics that would, you'd hear every now and again with them discussing was how and where, and the issues that they had actually sourcing these things, of like how to find them. And it wasn't always easy. So, for someone like yourself, I would imagine that's in very high demand, certainly from certain people in the restaurant industry. Would that be right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. It's a very real thing. If you think about it, up until fairly recent times, most of the hazelnuts that people have been consuming in Australia And in fact, this still applies now. Still, most of the hazelnuts that people consume in Australia were actually grown in the Northern Hemisphere and have been brought down to Australia by one means or another, and they've then become available to the market in Australia. So that means that most of the nuts, say, are grown come from Turkey. They grow fantastic nuts in Turkey, but the logistics of getting stuff from Turkey to here in Australia in bulk means that it generally comes by sea in a shipping container, and that journey takes some time. It also, in that journey, crosses the equator, and so it goes through a climate of quite high temperatures and maybe even high humidity for a period as well. Unless that container is refrigerated, we've got to think about, well, how is that impacting on the quality of the nut by the time it gets to Australia? And it can vary, but what I think a lot of people have experienced is they've eaten hazelnuts in Australia and they said, oh, I don't really like those that much, they're not that great. And that's because they're tasting a product which is quite old in lots of cases. It's not necessarily fresh. And that's our market niche, is that we say, okay, we'll crack them. You order today, we'll crack tomorrow, we'll post tomorrow, and you'll get them the next day. People find that that's a whole new experience in eating hazelnuts that they have not had experience of before. And when they eat our hazelnuts, they say, oh, I didn't know hazelnuts tasted like that. It's quite different to what we're used to. And that's very real. And especially in the restaurant game or in the catering game, that sort of edge, if you like, is very powerful. And it turns something which was sort of an average dish or not even a good dish into something which is quite amazing. And that's where we try and fit ourselves into it. So that's why I think there's a big future for potentially in the future for growing fresh produce here in Australia, hazelnuts especially, which can be enjoyed fresh by the local consumers. I think that's where we're trying to fit into it. And the whole organics thing is another layer, again, on top of all that. So, there is, you can see from that, I think that there's potential for the industry to grow quite a lot here. And it's really quite exciting for what could happen in the future.
Yeah, sure. Am I right in saying that Mount Roland hazelnuts had some exposure some years ago on MasterChef? Is that right?
Yeah. My 3 seconds of fame, I think it would count to. I've been watching MasterChef this year. Again, it's all go at the moment on the tellies, as you'd probably be aware. But I guess it goes back a little bit before then. Perhaps I can just go back a little bit to say how we got onto MasterChef. Was we thought there's food awards and food competitions and things like that. We thought, not really so keen on the idea of food awards. I can understand how you can have competitions for running 100 metres quickly or for playing tennis or something like that. You've got ways of measuring someone's faster than someone else, and so they get to the finish line, so they're the winner. But how do you actually judge food quality? And is that more than a subjective thing? Are there actually objective standards which you can apply to the judging of this food is better than that food, and this one gets a gold medal and that one doesn't get a gold medal? So we're a little bit dubious and sceptical about how that whole process works. But we thought, look, okay, we'll throw our head into the ring and we'll see if we can enter a competition with our hazelnuts, and we'll see what comes of it. So we did. We entered the Australian Food Awards. I think it was 2016. First time we'd ever done it. Didn't know how it was going to work. Thought, we'll have a crack and we'll see what happens. And amazingly enough, we not only got a gold medal for our produce at that food award, but we actually were judged to be the best in class of all the nut products in Australia. And I thought, okay, this is pretty amazing. Not quite sure how this has happened, but it's great that we were recognised Australia-wide for producing the best nut product in Australia. That was for our kernels. And so that was a pretty amazing outcome for us, and we were obviously really pleased by it. What it did was create a whole bunch of publicity around our product, and MasterChef people are always on the lookout for things like that. And so they saw what we'd achieved, and they said, would you like to bring some of your nuts over to Melbourne and be part of a show, produce show for the MasterChef? And we thought, well, that sounds pretty exciting. So we took 5 kilograms of our kernels over to Melbourne, and were invited appeared on a MasterChef edition there, and that was really good publicity for a product. Obviously, it's a very powerful thing. A lot of people watch MasterChef, and it actually raised the profile of our products enormously, and we've had a lot of ongoing sales because of that, and a lot of ongoing recognition because of that. So things like MasterChef, cooking shows generally, are really powerful in the Australian market these days for food.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think also like the fact that your produce is obviously absolutely fantastic, but then you've got that mix of where, people who are making food and using produce, then the methods and the exposure that has, but the methods that they have to craft it into some amazing kind of dish, given that, the industry as a whole like has such exposure and has now for many years, like the restaurant and the food shows and celebrity chefs is such a big thing and has been for such a long time now. I think it's a great, it's a perfect mix really, isn't it? That combination of, and finding, like I was saying before, like that the importance that many chefs and restaurants place on their suppliers, on where they supply it, but not only that, but then their kind of how their brand and their ethics, how similar they are too.
No, that's really true. I think the whole drive is now people trying to understand where their food's coming from. It's been really big, and for us, I mean, if you look at go to the supermarket sometimes and you see a packet of nuts and you think, okay, there they are in a little plastic bag sitting on a shelf, but where have they come from? And you can perhaps work it out. There might be some indications on the labelling as to where it's come from, but oftentimes that information is fairly vague and non-specific, and it doesn't. You don't really know much about them. I think that's one of our strengths in our business model, and it's one of the strengths for an online model, particularly in our modern world now, which a lot of agricultural producers are doing, is that you can produce a web page and you can provide to the consumer, the customer, the whole story of where this product has come from, and they can see it for themselves. And they can see pictures of the actual trees in the orchard where this nut that they're eating has come from, and they can trace it through. And that, I think, adds not only a whole lot of interest from the consumer's point of view, they've got a story that goes with the product, but it also gives them a lot of comfort, I suppose, in seeing that, okay, these people are certified organic, and this is how they grow their trees, and there's no sprays being used on that, and there's the soil tests which validate that experience. We know that these were harvested in March of 2020, and they were harvested from this paddock on those rows even, and we can tell them that, and we can show them a picture of the tree that the nut came from, more or less. And it's a whole product, and it's also the history of the grower, I think, comes into it. People like to link and connect with growers, and they can get pretty quickly a sense of credibility or not attached to that grower, and they can assess for themselves, is this something I would like to feed my family with, or is this something I prefer to leave on the shelf? And I think that extra information is very valuable, and it's what a lot of people, particularly those who are very conscious of their health, are very, very interested in making those connections and buying products which they have of themselves vetted, and they understand where they're coming from and how they got to the plate on the family table.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think that's the idea of just a story in general, not even a powerful story, is like how since the beginning of, I guess, human civilization, it's how people communicate, it's how people express ideas, and certainly from a marketing perspective, it's a key way to express to people what you're about. You can do that visually, but then or you can tell people that you're great, but ultimately if you weave it into some form of story that shows the history and gives people like a great understanding of not only, you know, how you do things, but then why you're doing it is I suppose that's where people are able to, even without, you know, meeting you personally, if you can build some sort of relationship with somebody, like even through your website, through those things you were talking about, and then they have, you know, the opportunity to actually experience your product, and then and they're like, wow, that, you know, that first part of the experience matches up completely with what I received, and these hazelnuts are, you know, absolutely fantastic. That's, you know, it's a really powerful tool, you know, just from on a range of levels, like on the simple marketing level, but also, you know, you being able to tell people and have the independence to do that, which I think is really important, like for any business to have that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's really true. And I think we've got to see our place in the world for what it is. And I think most organic producers would be the same, are generally niche producers. You're not producing a huge volume product. You haven't got hundreds of acres of hazelnut trees going on. You've got a relatively a commercial amount, yes, but not a huge amount. And so that way you can keep in touch with the products on a quite personal level. You know what's going on really intimately. And oftentimes too, organic producers, it takes a lot more physical and manual work and hands-on stuff to deal with the crop that you're producing. You don't just hop in your tractor and go down the row and spray things out, for example. You've got a lot of things have been done by hand. We harvest by hand, for example, rather than use big machines. So all this means that you do struggle to produce volumes, I suppose, and that's why we have conventional agriculture, because that produces the volumes of food that need to feed the vast number of people that are in the world today. But there's always a question of, well, organics is all very nice, but can you actually produce the volume to feed the planet? And that's a really good question, and it's a very interesting one. But I think for the moment, though, we're just trying to produce a product. We're not trying to feed the planet, because that's beyond what we can personally do. But we're trying to produce a good product which is produced as ethically and sustainably and as healthily as we possibly can. And I think that's the niche which organic producers fit into. And it will never be a large volume for us, because there's only 24 hours in a day and so much work you can do. And so the size of your orchard is limited by the amount of time you've got to manage it. And so for us, we'll always be fairly small producers compared to the big guys, but our quality hopefully will be high. And if we can make those direct links to our customers, then that not only makes for a good retail chain, if you like, but it also makes, and this is really important for us, makes for a high quality of life where we feel connected to not only what we're growing, but also to the people who are consuming our product at the end of the day. We have personal connections with all that stuff, and that, I think, enhances what we're doing.
Oh, well, you completely answered my next question, Greg, in that.
Sorry.
Which was great, because I was actually going to say in sort of, wrapping up, I was actually going to say the question was going to be that, even though I feel that you've explained quite well things relating to organic farming and organics as a whole, I was just going to ask for like a wrap up in terms of why you kind of chose that path in the first place. But you answered that really well. Like that's, it's obviously, I guess one analogy that kind of pops into my head about those two different, about say if you were going to go organics versus normal farming, now where people are using various chemicals, is that in some ways for me the idea itself conceptually of organics is more of a partnership with the environment, as opposed to maybe something like a slave master mentality. That you've got that I have to control things, and in order to do that I have to make them work a certain way, and if they don't, I'll force them into that, as opposed to going, I'm like we were saying before, we'll see what what is there, observe how it works currently, and fit in with that. Because ultimately, because I think the assumption is that you need to control things because, there's that kind of idea that always seems to be cropping up in, with people and various things, that you need to control nature, and that you need to harness it, and you need to make it do something because it's scary, or it's you can't control it. But the reality, like in many things that I've had exposure to, I find it's the exact opposite, and it's actually even time saving. Like once you know how things work, it's like you just need to fit in with it, and it does exactly what it's meant to do because it's been doing that all along.
Yeah, I think that's a really critical point, and that is the essence of, to me, what it's about to grow organically is just that. It's fitting in with nature rather than trying to dominate it, and that's it's a very different headspace, and I think it's one towards which we'll see a lot more of in the future. I think there's been a trend in the past for industries to just keep on getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We see that in lots of industries where they start off with a whole bunch of small operations and they get amalgamated into a bigger operation, which then often, because of commercial imperatives and economies of scale, they need to be bigger so they can justify buying a bigger machine to do this job. And that machine works across a larger area. And if it worked twice that area, well, then it'll be twice as efficient and you've got twice as better economies of scale. So you need to get bigger and bigger and bigger again. But there's a downside to that, is that you lose touch with the individual side of things, and you're also trying to impose your will upon the natural processes. And that can work, but I think one of the things, the bottom line things, is that really nature is much bigger than us. we are part of the system. We're not the gods of the system. And we if we think that we are controllers of nature, well then we need to perhaps rethink, because we look around at the droughts and the floods and the fires and things. These things are big things which happen, and we can do things to mitigate them, and we can do things to manage them. But ultimately, they are still huge forces on the outside which impact upon what we do, and it makes a lot more sense to try and fit in with those things to the best we can. Obviously, sometimes you can, sometimes they just, plenty of examples of really desperately major natural things which happen, which wipe things out. But as far as we can, we try and fit in with them and try and adapt ourselves so that we're resilient and sustainable and can actually keep on producing what we're trying to produce into the future. And that's one of the key things throughout the whole organic industry, I think.
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, on that note, that's probably a good sort of segue into, as we're moving to wrap up, for you to provide, if you would be so kind, Greg, a relevant sort of quote or something that you would really like to share that is sort of relevant about what we've been discussing.
Yeah. Well, I guess it always puts the pressure on Saul when you ask for someone to give a quote. You say, well, "Come on, just come out with a pearl of wisdom for us to hear." Not always easy to find that pearl, but I think I think we've already said it in a way, and I think it's just a matter of reiterating what's already been said. Is that nature is very large, very big, very powerful. A lot of it is not understood by us still, even though we might think we understand lots of things. There's lots out there which we just don't really know. As far as we can, my personal philosophy is to try and become aware of nature's forces and what it's doing, observe it, learn from it, and try our best to fit in with that, because that's probably going to lead us to the most productive and generally harmonious and happiest lifestyle, ultimately, by trying to fit in rather than trying to rule, dominate, and tame nature.
It sounds pretty good to me, Greg. I think that sounds pretty good. Yeah, no. Well, on that note too, would you be able to let everyone know about like the best way to get in contact with you?
Sure.
Your website address and anything else that you'd like to share?
Sure. Yeah, no, we're fairly easy to find if you've got the right Google tool. Our business name is Mount Roland Hazelnuts, and we're based here in Sheffield in Tasmania. And our webpage, if you search for Mount Roland Hazelnuts, you'll probably be taken to two things. One is our webpage, which is it's quite a comprehensive webpage with all sorts of photographs and information about what we do and how we do it. And that's sort of our major business platform. But we also have a Facebook page, which is very active, and a lot of people enjoy following that as well. So again, the search for Mount Roland Hazelnuts could well take you to our Facebook page, and that might be an interesting browse for people as well. So either way, from there, you will also have access to, obviously, emails and contact phone numbers and all the rest of it too. And we're delighted to hear from people. So if anyone has an interest in this area and would like to get in touch, I'd encourage them, and we'll welcome your inquiry.
Yeah, thanks so much, Greg. It's been absolute pleasure. Really great chat, and I very much appreciate your time with the podcast today. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you, Saul. We appreciate the opportunity, and wish you all the best with your podcasts. And I hope that continues to be a thriving source of activity for you.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's about sharing everyone's story. So thanks for sharing yours. So with that in mind, that's actually it for today, everyone. Thanks so much for listening into our podcast yet again. Before we go, please leave your feedback as well as any suggestions for any topics you would like us to discuss in future episodes. Thanks again for listening to the Grey Business Podcast, and we'll see you again soon. Bye, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Grow Your Business.